So you're watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. I'm actually out of the studio, currently at Murata Publica, because I was invited by the State Department to speak with Jill Finlayson, the Director of Edge in Tech of UC Berkeley. Her work revolves around gender, diversity, inclusion, and of course we want to talk about the equitable notion of how we can bring greater diversity in the realm of tech. Since she's from UC Berkeley, she's extremely familiar with the Bay Area, with the Silicon Valley, and the challenges that lie within. And of course, the comparing and contrasting of the kind of environments that is currently happening elsewhere around the world when it comes to tech startups, it's also important for us to see the lay of the land in terms of where it stands for gender diversity in the realm of tech. So this is my conversation with Jill Finlayson. She's in KL this week, speaking about gender diversity, equity, and inclusion. Enjoy the show. Let's start with the first question.
Okay.
Let's get the lay of the land on the issue of diversity in the world of tech and startup.
So as we know, women are not well represented in the world of tech, and actually more so in the United States, where about a quarter of the workforce is women in tech. Here it's more like 35%. But where we see challenges, right, is how people persist and advance in the tech ecosystem. In the United States, women drop out. They leave the tech workforce at twice the rate of men.
Oh.
And so there are a lot of reasons underlying that, and we need to address those underlying reasons.
And when you compare and contrast, say for instance, Asia with the US, how would things stand across the globe, in Europe, in China, in Africa?
Yeah, I think we see a lot of similar barriers across, but one thing that California and the United States does very well is it creates an ecosystem for innovation, right? We try to identify how can we introduce students, children, to entrepreneurship at earlier ages? What programs can we give people in college where they can do applied learning projects, startups? Like, how can we give them that experience early on and the skills and knowledge to go into the startup space?
When we talk about the world of tech and startup and women involvement, I tend to go back to the founder of YouTube and 23andMe again and again, largely because of their very inspiring and tenacious mom that is able to actually push through her three daughters to go big and have a meaningful impact on the world of tech startup. Do you feel that without such characters, it's very difficult for things like this to take place or repeat itself?
Absolutely. We need to see representation. You need to know that it's possible to succeed in these spaces. So we need women at the highest levels to show what is possible, but we also need near peers, right? We need people one step up from where you are, because that's more attainable. So seeing somebody who's a graduate student when you're an undergraduate student who's working on their PhD in tech, that's inspiring to young people because they can see tangibly how to get there rather than having a big gulf between you and this person who's incredibly successful.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your work at UC Berkeley?
So my job is the director of the Edge in Tech initiative, which stands for Expanding Diversity and Gender Equity in Tech. And so we do a few different things. The one is around what you were just talking about, representation. We do an annual symposium where we focus on a tech sector where the jobs are growing exponentially, but where women and other historically marginalized communities are not represented. And we talk about what are the jobs, why are they exciting, what are the things you can do in these jobs, and how do you get them? What are the pathways to those success? So that's one main thing we do. Another, we do roundtables with corporate execs to talk about how to create more equitable workplaces. And then we work with students, giving them these applied research and startup projects.
It's also important for us to talk about not just the underrepresented cohort, but women that drop out, you were mentioning earlier. They do take a heavier tax when it comes to building families. Even when they want to come back, they don't normally come back at the same level. They have to redo and restart everything. What would be some of the ideas that you can have to share with us today in terms of ensuring that even if they leave to start the family or for whatever reason, they do come back stronger than they were before they left?
So I think there's a number of things that can improve. Some of it is just around job descriptions and criteria. If you can make the criteria of the job description such that it doesn't penalize somebody who took 2 years off, that's going to be helpful. If you can write job descriptions in ways that focus on competencies rather than skills, people are more likely to see themselves in those jobs and more likely to apply for them. Once they're in the role, things like mentoring, but not just mentoring, because women tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. What is sponsored? Sponsored means somebody gives them a tap on the shoulder. Here's a speaking opportunity. Here's an advancement opportunity. Here's a stretch assignment. Those things are what help people grow in their tech career. So advancement opportunities is really key to retaining women in the tech workforce.
What would be some of the challenges that you see in terms of also extending this to the underrepresented cohort other than women?
So what we see is that there's one path for people like myself, a white woman, but for people who have intersectional identities, they have more than one reputation, more than one barrier, they have more challenges. And so understanding their individual challenges, allowing them to have employee resource groups where they can talk with other people about similar challenges that they've had, and increasing unconscious bias awareness so people can see where these things creep in to processes, into selection, are really key to identifying that not everybody has the same experience in the workplace, and we need to have empathy for that.
You know, in this part of the world, we tend to regulate heavily. We impose quotas on board representation of women, and we have strict regulations in order for companies, be it big or small, to comply with these kind of regulations. Regulatory requirements are a taboo. In America, I suppose, people tend to fight, or corporates tend to fight greater regulation. California even more so. Tech in California is unfortunately the least amenable to regulation. Where do you see things in terms of getting greater regulation or letting things, metamorph itself naturally?
Let's talk about regulation, and then let's also talk about system level changes. So on the regulation side, California actually passed a law that said we had to have more women's representation on boards. It was 1 by a certain year, 2 by a certain year, depending on the size of the company. Because of that regulation, we went from some 30% of companies having 0 women on the board to just over 2% of companies having zero women on the board. So regulation works. It showed that the glacial pace of change that was happening on boards was not because women weren't qualified. It was because they weren't being intentional about their outreach efforts. So that happened, and then of course our government said that's gender bias, and it said that's not constitutional, and it got rid of the law. So it sparked a change, but it didn't stand up to the courts in the examination of it. That said, there are things that we can do in the system to build in equality. So like when you're doing job interviews, you can have structured interviews. Ask people the same questions in the same way. Don't make women prove it again bias or be twice as good, right? Creating structure, allowing enough time for recruitment processes so you can go out to a larger audience, not relying on the things that you've done before that haven't worked, but actually trying new things. So building those things into how you run your business, integrating it into your processes, are how we can get some of these changes.
Do you feel there's friction from companies that would want to do this?
I think companies have a lot of priorities, and what they need to understand is that by making diversity, equity, and inclusion a priority, they actually return better revenues, they make better decisions, they have less risk, and it's actually better products because you've got people who understand different markets, different countries, different cultures, different experiences, and that's going to make your products better. So, you shouldn't have to argue the ROI on diversity, but the fact is it's not only a good thing morally and ethically, it's a good thing financially.
Yeah, and the business case is there, but the issue is it's slow to take off. So where do you see the gap is?
So I think people think of DEI as squishy, right? And so one of the things that we'd like to see
as well, by the way.
So here, exactly. So we see that these diversity initiatives are seen as squishy, soft, and therefore not measurable, not movable. It's about people. People are messy. But the thing is, it's not. You can actually track metrics. You can say how diverse was your pool? How many people made it through the interview? How many made it to this stage? Is that representative? Right? And so if you look at who's being promoted, who's not being promoted, All of these things will give you data and identify places where you have opportunities to improve outcomes. So this is the opportunities that to persist and be intentional and iterate. If you go to a tech company and you say, we have this technology problem, they're going to break out the napkins and they're going to start drawing and they're going to figure it out. And if it doesn't work, what are they going to do? They're going to try again. We need that same commitment to inclusion.
Iteration, pivoting to a point where you get the right recipe. Okay, we'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Jill Finlayson of UC Berkeley. Right, thanks for staying on. As promised, this is my conversation with Jill Finlayson, Director of Edge in Tech, UC Berkeley, talking about diversity, equity and inclusion in the realm of tech startups. Let's go back to the work that you're doing in UC Berkeley. You were mentioning earlier that on top of trying to build an ecosystem or an idea of imagery of future generations, depending on past generations in breaking through the barriers. You were also talking about having a conversation with the execs. What would be some of the conversations that took place there? What would be some of the ideas that you can share with us in terms of the concerns, worries, hopes, aspirations, dreams of these execs right now?
So the thing about execs is that everybody's well-intentioned, right? Everybody wants to do the right thing. So now it's the question of how do we help people actually achieve those goals?
Yeah.
And so working with companies, we try to show them how can data inform their efforts. We can show them quantitatively. For example, women are asked more prohibitive questions, men are asked more promotion questions. This is why it's important to ask questions in the same way. And so you work with them to bring transparency to what's going on in the process, and then you give them strategies that have been shown to work. Like you can look at salary equity, right? That's a simple thing to do, but it starts out with just looking at pay equity, but then you want to look at total compensation, especially in tech, where things like stock and bonuses really make a huge difference, and that's where we see, again, the gender gap growing, whereas the salary gap is actually closing.
Okay, press tax in terms of the data and matrices, what would be some of the ideas that you can share with us?
Say that again?
The data, the kind of data or matrices that you can share with us in terms of what the execs are looking at, the items that you're showing.
So they are looking at data around, salary equity, but they're also looking at how are our hiring rates? Are we hiring equitably in the tech space? Are we advancing equitably in the tech space? Are we addressing barriers perceived, in other words, so looking at unconscious bias and unconscious bias training, does that improve outcomes after a leader has had that? Because leaders who have these training have greater awareness, but what we need to then do is align behaviors with that, and that's where we can show them data that says if you make these systemic changes, you're going to improve outcomes.
It's also important to note that in the world of tech startups, it's a messiah complex, I suppose. It's not necessarily permeated across the organization. If the founder believes in an idea, he or she, normally he, will take that idea, to the letter. Do you feel that that needs to change as well? Something that is systemic like this must be felt across organizations, despite the size of it, as long as it's in tech.
Yeah, it is challenging because in an organization, it's very hard to change things from the bottom up. So you do need that top-down buy-in and support to make changes. We do need to have peer pressure across companies and organizations. We see that with sustainability, right? Companies wanting to have net zero goals. We need to have the transparency because that creates the public pressure and accountability to continue to pursue and improve the outcomes.
Okay, let's talk about some of the folks that's watching us right now. They're inspired to have a future in tech. They do feel that the risk of them succeeding might not necessarily be there, considering that they might be either women or folks from underrepresented cohorts. What would be some of the ideas that you can share with us in order to inspire them to actually go, head on and embrace this particular career?
So there are so many exciting technologies out there that can help you do the things that matter to you. So the exciting thing for young people is to say, what's a problem in my community that I want to solve? How might technology help me solve that problem? How might it help me solve that problem at scale? And so looking at ways that you can achieve things that you're passionate about, change your community for the better, and how technology can help you do that. And the flip side, I want to say, is we need the girls and the women designing these products. We need these women and girls designing these products, because right now, artificial intelligence is going to be a game changer. And if we don't have women and other people from different communities involved, they're going to be disproportionately negatively impacted. So they need to be involved in the design of these products. They need to raise concerns, put in safeguards, and create products that work well for everybody, not just for a privileged small subset of people.
Absolutely. What about the other half of the population that does, as you mentioned earlier, well-intentioned, well-meaning, but not necessarily be fully aware of the situation?
So absolutely, we need better allies. I mentioned earlier women being over-mentored, under-sponsored. We need men to step up and sponsor women and point out when they say something that's impressive, repeat it and say that person said this thing that was impressive. They need to make sure people get the recognition for their ideas and aren't talked over, right? They need to make sure all voices are heard. And they have the opportunity to really grow themselves and learn more about better leadership styles around being an empathetic leader, being a leader who can make sure all voices are heard, build collaboration, build psychological security for team building, right? These are critical leadership skills in the 21st century, and we need to have men have these skills just as much as women have these skills.
And exhibit these skills consistently.
Consistently. If you see a problem, call it out. If you see an opportunity to raise someone up, raise them up.
All right. Also, you're in Malaysia, and prior to starting the interview, you were doing a whirlwind tour of all the big cities in the country. What were some of the ideas that you'll be sharing with us here while you're in Malaysia?
So I'm going to be sharing and learning, honestly, about what the women entrepreneurs here are doing and the amazing things that they're accomplishing, and sharing some of their own knowledge with others. So part of me is like collecting and sharing. The other part is to
collecting data perpetually, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And then this opportunity to help them to think about, how do we make these system changes? What can I do as an individual? How can my organization do better? And really looking at, how do we inspire more entrepreneurs? How do we support more girls and women coming into technology? Because there's so many exciting things out there. There aren't enough people to fill the talent gap in these areas. So for society as a whole, for Malaysia as a whole, we need more women and girls in these fields.
One more break before we conclude our conversation with Jill Finlayson, the guest that is brought over by the State Department of the USMC KL. Thanks for staying on. This is my conversation with Jill Finlayson of UC Berkeley. I spoke to the IBM CEO a few years ago. IBM is a rather interesting organization because they do allow for women to leave the organization and come back at that level, at the same level that they left. However, I can only cite IBM as an example. I can't really think about any other companies out there doing the same. There are corporate leaders that are watching this interview or this conversation between us. What will be some of the messages that you can share with them in terms of trying to get more involved in this story?
I think it's a learning exercise, right? We know in the 21st century, technologies are changing at a hugely rapid pace. You have to be a continuous learner. So you have to make the effort, you have to be intentional, ask what's going on, bring in the experts, and then actually act upon these things. This is not a conversation to be had. This is an opportunity to make change. And one thing I will say is with COVID, it was very disruptive. Suddenly we had so many people who were working from home. And this changed the game for companies because they were like, oh, people can work from home, people can be accountable, people can have flexible schedules. And these things turn out to be disproportionately helpful to women, right? To be able to flex schedule, to be able to work from home. These things, people who have long commutes, to not have a long commute and be able to put that time productively to use. This is an opportunity to reinvent work. If you're going to ask people to come to the office, have a reason to come to the office.
Yeah.
I'm not anti-office, I'm anti-non-reason office. Like, don't make me come in just to sit there for no reason. Have me come in to interact with other people or to brainstorm on a whiteboard. Let's make the office a better place.
Yeah, okay. You raised a very good point. So I'm actually at two minds with this. On one hand, I do look at output and outcomes, not necessarily the activities that is being done. On the other hand, I received a lot of mentorship at the water cooler kind of event when I started off my career. I see a business leader, a division head, and I can just stop the individual and just ask him a few things. He or she will normally just, give his peace of mind. It's that kind of informal training, right? So that only happens, the way I look at it, is at the workplace, because I don't see a CEO walking past my living room. That's the idea. So where do you see when it comes to informal mentorship or training, or at least, how we see business leaders or division leaders, they perform, they act, they think? Wouldn't that have some sort of direct impact on how you would grow up in your career?
So I am of mixed minds of this as well, because I think especially for new graduates, it's hard to establish yourself in a new company and get to know people from an entirely remote place.
Yeah.
However, the technology tools are exponential. As we know, Zoom is very popular, but we're also seeing other collaboration tools. And the fact is, the water cooler conversation, the happening to bumping into people, didn't work for everyone. It worked for people who were extroverts. It worked for people who were a certain personality, but the introverts and other people who didn't bump into, weren't in the right circles, weren't getting that informal mentorship. So here's the opportunity. Be more intentional. Set up a weekly Zoom meeting with each employee over time, right? Have that check-in. One of the things we learned is when people leave, they leave because they don't see advancement opportunities. What if you have a stay interview and say, how are things going? What would need to happen to keep you here? And have that conversation before they've decided to leave. Because we know turnover is huge, and rehiring is expensive.
And the ability for this generation, particularly Gen Z, to leave, they just leave. It's
exactly.
unbelievable.
There is, companies used to be loyal and then they weren't, and now the employees used to be loyal and now they're not.
Yeah, they're not even looking at pay. It's unbelievable. It's job satisfaction. I have it's crazy. They come and go as they wish. It's like they will join us for 3 months. It doesn't work out. They just leave.
But guess what will get them to stay? If they feel a sense of belonging in the workplace, if they have advancement opportunities, and they have a shared vision and purpose. So if you can get them aligned with, we're going to change the world and we're going to make it a better place, they're going to stay with you.
And it's more pronounced in women, right?
It's more pronounced in women, but I would say it's really pronounced in the young generation, which is your next gen of employees. They all care about our planet. They all care about doing something that's going to make the world a better place. So aligning your company goals with how you can positively impact people in society is really helpful in keeping employees.
I was talking to my 15-year-old this morning. A little bit of drama in the morning, but in the car I was asking her. She always asks me this question. So who are you interviewing today? I said, I'm going to be speaking to Finlayson of UC Berkeley. And my daughter's like, okay, what does she do? She's thinking about how to improve gender diversity in the tech startup. And she's like, oh, that's nice. But how come it's not working? I said, well, of course, we need to get this done, right? And she said, hey, you want to know something, Daddy? I said, what? I really want to impact the world in a better place, but money isn't the issue. Satisfaction is.
Yep.
I said, but you gotta pay bills. When you're my age, you have an astronomical amount of bills to pay. And she said, yeah, but that'll come later. I said, what comes later? Money. Money will come later. If I have job satisfaction, if I'm happy with my job, and if I can deliver the necessary outcomes, money shouldn't be a problem. This way of thinking is unbelievable for me, because the way I'm brought up, it's like, get a good job with a high pay. For her, it's job satisfaction first.
Right.
It's critical, right, for this generation to see this way?
It's absolutely critical. They want to see that what the company that they're working for aligns with their values. right, is focused on bringing more women and people to the table and making sure everybody's voice is heard and they're included. And I will also add that it's really helpful that the family is supportive, and fathers in particular. If you're like, go tech, they're gonna go tech, right? This opportunity for the family to really support the ambitions and remove barriers and say, go for it, that's huge.
Jill, thank you very much. Any final words before we end the conversation?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm a foodie. I can't wait to try the food. And I look forward to meeting all of these amazing people, because everybody I've met so far has been so amazing and so innovative. So, you know, I'm excited to see what happens.
The temperature's a bit hot, though.
But that just means people are cooking on all cylinders.
That's right. That's right. Very much. Okay, thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you so much.
So that was my conversation with Jill Finlayson, the Director of Edge in Tech. We are here talking about diversity, equity and inclusion. There's a lot more of this conversation that needs to be discussed. It doesn't end here, of course. So continue to have a conversation with us. You can tweet me directly at Ibrahim Sani net, and perhaps share your views on what you think about impacting greater diversity, equity and inclusion of women and other underrepresented cohorts, perhaps not just in the world of tech startups, but in the realm of business as well. This interview has been brought to you exclusively by Astro AWANI in collaboration with the US Embassy in Kuala Lumpur.